Welcome to part two. Part one ended on a real cliffhanger. And so now we're going to pick up here for section number 6, opinions and consequences. So I think the decision in this case should be made. One of the questions was, should a decision be made? I think that Mr. Emmon has a responsibility to make a decision in this case. His passive resistance of making a decision only passes the buck to somebody else. And he basically knows what somebody else is going to decide. He is just choosing to not participate in the process. And so I think that Mr. Emmon has a responsibility, really an ethical responsibility, to advocate on behalf of David. And so again, no action means that he's not advocating for an ethical decision to be made and is passively letting others make that decision for him. And we know that's going to end up in the expulsion of David. Probably the most extreme action I could take would be to quit and stand up for what I think is right. In protest, I could give up my job and say, it's either going to expel or not expel David, or I'm going to quit and take a ethical stand in that way. However, I'm assuming that I probably do not want to be poor. And so my most logical liberal action would be to continue to lobby against David's expulsion. Probably the most extreme I could do would be to take my case to the school board, or as I'm reading through this, I could probably even go so far as taking my case to the media. So there is a severe job at risk in doing that. I think, again, the most liberal thing I could do would be to continue to stand up both verbally and as publicly as I could to advocate for David. And this is a reflection of my own ethical framework, to advocate for an ethical decision to be made. Probably a more intermediate strategy would be to have private conversations with my building principal and superintendent in a respectful way, by bringing the facts of the case and my desire to do what's right ethically for all of our students, especially in this case for David. It's important to set a precedent here and to think about further instances where bullying may occur. In that discussion with my building principal and superintendent, I would point out that David is a victim, and that by suspending him, we are not fulfilling our ethical obligation to protect him, and we're not doing what is best in his interest or for his education. The pros and cons. Some of the pros of not taking an action, just being passive, would show that despite the threat of punishment, that I feel passionate about David's case. I'm willing to not file the paperwork and would be willing to be reprimanded for not doing so. I think, again, the cons of not taking action is that action will still be taken by somebody else. And again, I think the no action does not model positive personal conduct, or it does not advocate for an ethical decision to be made. The pros for taking this case to the school board is that ultimately the school board is responsible for district policy and decisions. I think presenting this case to the school board helps protect David and potentially helps bring about changes in district policy. I think by promoting this to people higher on the food chain than myself, I'm advocating for an ethical decision to be made, and I am also encouraging ethical behavior in others. I think the biggest con of continuing to push this issue is getting a letter of reprimand in my file and potentially losing my job for circumventing the chain of command. The pros for advocating for David to my building principal and possibly superintendent is the opportunity to model positive personal ethical conduct and ethical decision making, and to argue on David's behalf. I think with further investigation into the case and more facts, I can present information that showed David was a victim, and that as a district, we have, again, an ethical obligation to protect the emotional health of our students. The cons are that I may not be successful. David is still expelled, and my job is at risk. I think even more importantly is that if I fail, that our students continue to be at risk as victims of bullying. The option I decided to go with would be to refuse to file the paperwork and continue to advocate for David and a change in district policy. This decision includes a lot of stakeholders, including my principal, superintendent, and school board. I understand the district may go ahead and expel David, but I can make it known that I do not agree with this policy, and I can continue to advocate for our ethical obligation to protect victims of bullying. In fact, I think I would probably be proud to receive a reprimand for standing up for a student who was bullied. I think this is a great way to model personal ethical behavior and to stand up for the things that we believe in. I think the decision to advocate is a pretty easy one to make. Just gather the facts and present those in the best way possible. I would do so in a respectful way and to show that I do respect the people above me. I just disagree with the decision that is being made. I think it'd be very important in that presentation to let my own moral compass come through and to show my passion for all students, but also my passion to protect students, especially those that have been bullied. I had a hard time coming up with any creative options that are here. I think that probably the ones I've discussed are the most realistic and the ones that have the most chance of making a difference. There's going to be a punishment or there's not going to be a punishment. Anything that results in a reduced expulsion or an alternative action, say, for example, community service, is still a punishment and it is still unfair to somebody that is a victim of bullying. And so I think that the best thing to do is to advocate for no punishment and the protection of students who are bullied in school. Last, my path, again, is to not follow the paperwork and to continue to advocate for students like David. Again, I think we have an ethical obligation to stand up for students that are bullied and intimidated. I don't think this is expelling David serves any purpose. It does not teach him any lesson. It does not hold him accountable for any action. There is nothing for him to gain or the school district to gain in this type of case. I think the consequences of my actions are that I'm probably going to receive a letter of reprimand in my file. However, I also hope that there's a positive consequence would be the district examines their policies and changes policies and looks at ways that they can continue to protect students that are bullied. The change in district policy would probably be the best possible outcome of my advocating for David and the protection of victims. One of the questions was, who am I going to communicate with? And obviously, I would communicate with my building principal. I think it would be important for me to go in and sit down and have a conversation with him and to continue to follow up as needed. Email I don't think is sufficient in this case. And so I think a sit down face to face, examining the facts, trying to get the principal to look further into the case and to understand the consequences of suspending somebody who is a victim of bullying. The last question dealt with dealing with the consequences and learning to warn and not threaten. In this situation, I don't think that there is a need for me to threaten anyone. I don't think that's appropriate in that case. I don't think there's even a need to warn anybody. I think that simply communicating my beliefs in a respectful way and accepting the consequences that go along with that are more than enough. I don't think I need support from anyone in that case. I think that just communicating that to myself, to my building principal, would be more than enough. Thank you very much.
You didn't